When I look back at how it all began, I realize the story was never about one reckless moment. It was about years of silence, years of invisibility, and the sudden arrival of someone who made me feel seen again. My name is Margaret, and at 55 I had resigned myself to a life of routine. I was a wife, a mother, and a woman who had quietly accepted that passion belonged to the past. My husband, Richard, was a good man in many respects. Steady, hardworking, dependable. But affection had long ago slipped out of our marriage. We shared a home, not a heartbeat. Conversations dwindled to small exchanges about bills, repairs, or schedules. The comfort of companionship had been replaced by the dull weight of habit. I had grown used to this rhythm, convincing myself it was enough. After all, what did a plus-sized woman of my age have the right to expect? Society had already cast me in the shadows, whispering that desire and beauty were the privileges of youth. I carried those whispers inside me, even when I smiled. Then Ethan appeared. 25 years old, the son of a colleague of Richard's, he came into our lives under the most ordinary circumstances. At first, he was simply helpful, running errands for his parents, offering to fix small things around the house. But his presence unsettled me in ways I couldn't name. His laughter had an ease to it, his eyes an attentiveness I had forgotten how to receive. When he spoke to me, it wasn't as though he was indulging an older woman out of courtesy. He asked questions, listened, responded with genuine curiosity. The first time his hand brushed mine, I dismissed the rush that followed as foolishness. The second time, when his compliment lingered a second too long, I found myself wondering what exactly he saw in me. And by the third, I could no longer pretend I didn't notice the subtle shift in the air whenever he walked into the room. The conflict was simple yet profound. I was a married woman, bound by vows and years of shared history, yet here was a young man who awakened in me the very feelings I thought had withered away. Every instinct told me to push him away, to preserve the fragile balance of my marriage, but my heart, lonely, starved of affection, leaned toward him like a flower toward sunlight. It would have been easier if Richard had noticed, if he had reached for me with even a fraction of the warmth Ethan offered. But Richard remained blind, absorbed in his work, his routines, his own world. And so the secret grew in the spaces he left empty. That was the beginning. Not a single kiss, not even a spoken promise, but the quiet recognition that something dangerous and irresistible had taken root. I told myself it was nothing, that it would fade with time. I didn't know then how deeply it would change me, or how impossible it would be to stop. Richard and I had fallen into a marriage of silence. It wasn't hostile, not in the way that shouts and slammed doors leave scars, but in a quieter, subtler erosion. He occupied the armchair every evening with the television remote in his hand, while I busied myself in the kitchen or folded laundry in the bedroom. We lived together but rarely touched, spoke, or laughed. After 3 decades of marriage, we were more like co-tenants than lovers. I often told myself that this was simply the natural course of long relationships. Affection fades, intimacy dulls, and companionship replaces passion. Yet the truth was harder to swallow. I felt invisible, unwanted, a shadow moving quietly through a house that no longer held warmth. And then there was Ethan. At 25, he embodied everything Richard was not: attentive, curious, eager to connect. He arrived at our home with effortless charm, his youth filling the rooms with an energy that unsettled me. At first I resisted acknowledging what I felt. It was absurd, even shameful to recognize how much his presence stirred me. He was young enough to be my son, and yet when he looked at me I didn't feel old. I felt alive. His questions were never careless. "What did you dream about when you were my age?" he asked once, his eyes steady, as if my answer truly mattered. The question startled me. Richard hadn't asked about my dreams in decades, if he ever had at all. Little moments accumulated, each one carving cracks into the wall of restraint I had built around myself. The way Ethan laughed at my jokes when no one else listened. The way he carried grocery bags from my car without being asked. The way he lingered at the door after saying goodbye, as if reluctant to step away. I told myself it was harmless, that I was overthinking, but my body betrayed me. My pulse quickened at the sound of his footsteps in the hall. My heart ached when he left. In those quiet moments, I saw clearly the shape of my loneliness and how easily Ethan filled it. The central conflict became impossible to ignore. I was torn between duty and desire, between the safe numbness of my marriage and the dangerous vitality Ethan represented. Richard, oblivious to the tension simmering in our home, drifted further from me with each passing day. Ethan, in contrast, leaned closer, his gaze lingering, his compliments soft but insistent. One evening, as Richard muttered about a project at work, I caught myself staring at him and wondering, if he had ever looked at me the way Ethan did, would I have felt this hunger? Or was it inevitable that someone, someday, would awaken what Richard had long neglected? The thought frightened me, because it meant I was already standing on the edge of something I might not be able to undo. The distance between Richard and me widened with each passing week, and into that space Ethan seemed to step effortlessly. What unsettled me most wasn't the fact that he was young, it was that he paid attention. He noticed when I cut my hair shorter, when I wore a new shade of lipstick, when I hummed to myself while cooking. Each observation felt like a lifeline thrown into the sea of invisibility where I had been drifting for years. One evening, Richard left for a business trip that would keep him away for several days. I told myself it would be uneventful, that I would busy my time with household chores and reading. But the knock on the door came sooner than I expected. Ethan stood there, holding a folder of documents his father had asked him to deliver. His shirt was damp from the drizzle outside, his hair slightly tousled. Something about the sight of him, unguarded, casual, made my breath catch. We ended up in the kitchen, steam rising from the teacups between us. Our conversation flowed easily, laughter echoing through the space that so often felt muted when Richard was home. When Ethan reached across the counter to brush a crumb from my sleeve, his fingers lingered longer than necessary. "You don't know how beautiful you are," he murmured. The words struck like lightning. My instinct was to dismiss them, to tell him he was being foolish. Instead, I stood frozen, my heart pounding, my face warm. No one had spoken to me like that in years. "Ethan, you shouldn't say things like that," I whispered, though the tremor in my voice betrayed how much I wanted to believe him. "Why not?" His gaze was steady, unwavering. "Because you're older? Because you're married? Or because it scares you to hear the truth?" His honesty cut through every excuse I had rehearsed in my mind. I turned away, desperate to gather my composure, but the silence stretched heavy between us. When he reached for my hand, I didn't pull back. The warmth of his palm against mine unlocked a longing I could no longer deny. That night, after he left, I lay awake in bed beside Richard's empty pillow. The storm outside rattled the windows, but it was the storm inside me that refused to quiet. My thoughts circled endlessly: guilt, exhilaration, fear. I told myself it had been just a moment, a slip that could be contained. Yet deep down, I knew we had already crossed a line, even if no one else could see it. By the time Richard returned, I had rehearsed 1,000 times how I would restore balance, how I would build walls again between Ethan and myself. But when Ethan appeared at my door the next afternoon, smiling that earnest smile, I realized the walls had already crumbled. The days blurred into one another, each visit from Ethan adding a new thread to the tangled web I could no longer ignore. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was comfort, validation, a reminder that I was still alive beneath the layers of routine and disappointment. Yet the deeper I let him in, the sharper my guilt became, like a thorn lodged too deep to remove. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself in the conservatory, sunlight spilling across the glass panes as Ethan helped me repot a plant Richard had long neglected. His sleeves were rolled up, soil smudged against his forearm, and when he looked up at me, there was something raw in his expression, something that stripped away the last of my defenses. "Margaret," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than the single word should have. "I can't keep pretending this is casual. I care about you, deeply, more than I ever thought possible." I froze, the trowel slipping from my hand and clattering against the tiled floor. My pulse roared in my ears. "Ethan, don't," I managed, but my protest sounded weak, almost rehearsed. "No, listen," he pressed, moving closer. "You've spent years being overlooked, diminished, treated like your feelings don't matter. But with me, you matter Every laugh, every word, every look, you matter to me. His intensity was disarming. No one had ever spoken to me with such conviction, not even Richard in the early years of our marriage. I wanted to dismiss his words as youthful infatuation, but when his hand touched mine, I felt a truth in his grip that left me trembling. "But what about him?" I whispered, the weight of my husband's name unspoken, but present between us. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Richard doesn't see you anymore, I do, and I won't apologize for it." The silence that followed was unbearable. Every breath I took felt stolen, borrowed from a life that didn't belong to me. My mind flashed with images of Richard's distracted eyes, his dismissive gestures, his absence even in presence. And then Ethan's gaze, steady, unyielding, filled with a devotion I hadn't felt in decades. Without meaning to, I leaned forward, the distance between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth of his breath. It was reckless, dangerous, inevitable. When his lips finally met mine, the world seemed to fall away, every doubt, every fear drowned in a surge of hunger and relief. The kiss lasted only a moment, but it was enough to shatter the fragile balance I had tried so desperately to preserve. Pulling back, I pressed my fingers to my lips, heart pounding. "What have we done?" I whispered. Ethan's eyes didn't waver. "We've told the truth." I wanted to argue, to retreat, but deep down I knew he was right. For the first time in years, I had felt something real, and that truth, however dangerous, could no longer be buried. The days that followed felt suspended, as though time itself hesitated to move forward. Every sound in the house seemed louder, the creak of the stairs, the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, as if each one were a reminder that my world had shifted in ways I couldn't undo. Ethan didn't press me, not immediately. He gave me space, sending only brief messages. "Are you okay?" Or "Thinking of you." Each one was both a comfort and a weight, pulling me toward a choice I wasn't ready to make. Richard returned from his trip with the same distracted air he always carried, his suitcase thudding against the floor as though it belonged to another life entirely. He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, muttered something about being exhausted, and retreated to his office. I stood in the doorway watching him and realized that nothing in him had changed. But everything in me had. For the first time in years, I wasn't numb. I was restless, alive, terrified. My guilt gnawed at me, yes, but so did the memory of Ethan's words, his conviction, the way he made me feel seen. That kind of truth is difficult to ignore once you've tasted it. I began to notice small details more acutely. The way Richard barely glanced at me during dinner. How his phone seemed to hold more of his attention than I did. How silence filled our bedroom like a third presence. Once, I might have accepted these things as inevitabilities of marriage. But now, they stood in stark contrast to the warmth I had felt in Ethan's gaze. Late one night, I found myself sitting by the window, the city lights scattered across the horizon. I asked myself the question I had been avoiding. Was this truly love, or simply the desperate clutch of a woman starved of affection? The answer wasn't simple. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps love, at its core, is the recognition of one soul by another, regardless of age, circumstance, or consequence. Ethan had recognized me. That was undeniable. Still, the choice loomed like a shadow. Remain in the safety of a hollow marriage, or step into the uncertainty of something forbidden, yet undeniably real. Both paths carried risks, both demanded sacrifices. I don't know where I will land. Even now, as I write these words, I feel the tug of both lives. The one I've known for decades, and the one that tempts me with possibility. But one thing is certain. I can no longer pretend to be invisible. Whether with Richard, Ethan, or on my own, I must honor the truth of my heart. Because once you've been seen, truly seen, you cannot return to the shadows. And maybe, just maybe, that is the real beginning of my story.